Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in. It is so good to see everyone in person. This feels like a reunion where we've been apart for so long, at least physically. I know we've all been connected via Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeeting and Teams and through a variety of other platforms, but you just can't beat getting together in person. So it's inspiring to see so many friends and colleagues here in the audience. All of you are working very, very hard to address homelessness, and for that we thank you. We'll be spending a bit of time this morning talking about homelessness and about how we can address this critical issue together in some really different and exciting ways. My name is Amy St. Peter. I am the Deputy Executive Director with the Maricopa Association of Governments, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our session this morning. I'll cover a few housekeeping items, then offer a very brief introduction. We'll spend the majority of the session in a dialogue with our esteemed speakers on our panel, and then we'll offer up the opportunity for you to ask questions as well from the microphone in the middle of the room. All of our bios and contact information are available in the app for this conference. Please do feel free to contact us after the event. We'd love to hear from you during the session, but we are particularly excited to continue this dialogue with you after the session. So again, thank you very much for coming here today. In terms of just a few housekeeping items, again, we don't have a formal PowerPoint, but our bios and contact information are in the app that's available. If everyone could please turn off or at least silence your cell phones. You know, one of my most memorable moments when somebody did not do that was when I was presenting at a large event and I heard a cat meowing and I thought, oh gosh, I've just completely lost my mind. And somebody's ringtone was a cat meowing. So please, no cats meowing, no cell phones ringing. Please put them aside. People will wait until the session is done, so thank you for that. We will be talking about homelessness, particularly from a holistic perspective. Homelessness was not solved or was not created by any one sector, nor can it be solved by any one sector. It truly does take all of us working together to make a difference in addressing homelessness. And so we'll be considering homelessness from that holistic perspective this morning. Our speakers today are Cindy, Sandy, and Liz. They'll introduce themselves in just a moment. I think you'll be excited to hear about their different perspectives from the nonprofit, municipality, and statewide affiliations and experience. So more to come on that in just a few moments. I think many of us are here today because we're concerned about homelessness, because we're seeing dramatic increases. In fact, for the past 4 years, we've seen increases in homelessness, not just here throughout the region, but across the entire country. We do, however, have the dubious distinction throughout the state of Arizona as having the largest percentage increase of homelessness in the entire country. The pace of our growth here in homelessness is faster than anywhere else. There are a few reasons for that. There are probably a number of reasons for that, such as the dwindling supply of our affordable housing, the evictions that are looming, particularly with the moratorium being lifted, and a number of other factors. So again, this takes a multidisciplinary response. And so that's why we're here today, is to talk about what that response can look like and to talk about the exciting work that's underway. Homelessness is inherently also needing a collaborative approach. When people are experiencing homelessness, they move from one community to another in search of housing and jobs and assistance. The impact of homelessness in one community is felt far beyond the borders of that one community. So inherently, we are all in this together. We've seen experiences when homelessness has not gone well, when communities are being sued because of their lack of response to homelessness. We've also seen glimmers of hope here throughout the state of Arizona, as well as throughout our country, when people really are making progress. And we are focused on tangible, measurable results. And so today in our panel, we'll be talking about what that looks like and how do we get there. At this point now, I'd ask my esteemed panelists to please introduce themselves just briefly. Again, their bios are in the program materials for this conference, where you can get to learn about them more, and you'll learn more about their perspectives as we engage in the dialogue this morning. Cindy, would you like to start us off, please?
Thank you, Amy. Good morning. Hi, I'm Cindy Stotler. I'm the Deputy Director at the Arizona Department of Housing. Just started this role in June, and prior to that, I was the Housing Director for the City of Phoenix.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandy Flores. I'm the Senior Programs Director for Catholic Charities across northern Arizona. My home city is Flagstaff. Shout out to my city council members I see here. I've been doing this work for quite some time. I've been with Catholic Charities over 15 years, working across northern Arizona. So
Good morning. Liz Morales. I'm with the City of Tucson. I am the Director for Housing and Community Development Department. I've been there 2 years. Prior to that, I worked in the City of Mesa and also City of Phoenix.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz, Cindy, and Sandy. Okay, we have 3 questions for our panel dialogue, and after that, we are happy to take any questions that you might have as well. And so homelessness, again, is inherently multi-sector. And so there are many people engaged in tremendously good work in this area. That includes elected officials, the nonprofit community, faith leaders, the business community, and neighborhood groups as well. So my first question then for our panelists, and ask them to jump in as they feel inspired to do so, is how do you communicate with and coordinate with these diverse different sectors, with all these different kinds of partners who maybe have different pain points and different drivers that are bringing them to this work? Who would like to begin?
Sure, I'll begin. Thank you, Amy. So the first and the really good news in this area is that all of these different diverse stakeholders recognize that we have a homelessness problem. Even the business sector recognizes that, and that we need to do something to solve it. And they're all determined to work on it, and they all want to work on it and help. And the challenge is bringing them all together from their different perspectives, their different priorities, motivations, and trying to pull them together to accomplish like projects and plans and implementation of wide-ranging goals. One of the things that we've done at the State Department of Housing, Tom Simplot has come in as the director. He came in right before me in May, and then I came in June. And we decided to go on a listening tour. So we've been holding roundtables and forums to listen to all of the different stakeholders around homelessness. And one of the forums is just a Friday morning shelter forum. And we started that one, and we do it every Friday, but we started that one right away. And that was just to get everybody on the same page. What's going on in shelters across the state? It is a lot focused in the metro areas right now, but we are growing it across the state. But just talking to each other, I don't think that even in that one sector where everyone has the same goals and the same priorities, shelter, they weren't speaking to each other, and they weren't cross-contaminating with, not cross-contaminating, it sounds bad with the pandemic, I'm sorry. They weren't working together across their agencies and organizations to help each other and to even know what was going on. And one of the things I'll just point out before I turn it over is youth homelessness in Maricopa County. We know we have a big homeless youth population in Maricopa County, and what we were hearing in the Friday morning shelter meetings was that there were like 3 beds available over here or 2 beds available over here, and then other people were picking up going, well, I have some youth in my congregate shelter that would be better off in your youth shelter. So they're starting to talk to each other and actually better use their resources, and that's one of our goals there.
Excellent.
Okay, so I'm here for the rural perspective, and I think that one of the challenges is that every community in, there's Maricopa County, there's Pima County, and then there's the balance of state. And in the balance of state, there's such a diverse community in every different location. And so it's really about trying to figure out what that community needs, what are the needs there, who are the folks that are invested, and then sitting down to have those dialogues. And I think that we're not very good at that years ago. I think we've become much better at that, at breaking down silos and really having hard but good conversations. But they're hard conversations, and I think it's really critical to open that door for your business sector, your government sector, your nonprofits. I think nonprofits tend to be, speaking from one, we tend to be the defensive one sometimes. And so it's about really opening the door and realizing that we're not going to get anywhere if we don't work together, but also to really clearly define what you're looking for in a community, what are the needs, because they're not the same. They're not the same in Flagstaff versus Bullhead City or Page. They're very different. So it's about really identifying and narrowing down, and that sometimes takes some really difficult conversations with folks, but I think that that's the critical piece. Open the door for those.
So coming from Southern Arizona, city of Tucson, a few things that I feel that is important to talk about is that from every perspective, there's an urgency to solve the problem. And so understanding that in talking to our neighborhoods, our neighborhood leaders, the residents, they're feeling very vulnerable and frustrated. I'm sure I'm not sharing anything you don't already know. For the business aspect, their concern is around impact on customers, the interactions they may be having with those who are living on the streets. And from the elected officials, my interactions is hearing from them is, how do I balance the demands of the constituents, understanding what resources are available, and what are the best practices? What can we do that we haven't done? Some solutions that I've seen in our as we communicate and try to work together, what I really have loved, some of our elected officials have shadowed staff, gone to some with our outreach staff, talking about shelter calls. Through the pandemic, we had one of our elected officials on our weekly shelter call. That's where we determined that they were super concerned about the spread of COVID and not being able to keep people separated well enough. So what we did is that's when we decided to move towards getting hotels, and we reserved basically whole hotels, one for COVID positive, two other ones for those who are high risk. We ended up having about 315 rooms for over a year to address this need. And as a result of that and our ability to house those that we put in the hotels, now the elected officials have given us authority to move forward to buy and purchase 3 properties, hotels, so that we can continue to do that work. It's expensive, but it really did have a good return on the investment. On the business community side, some solutions we've seen, again, from the hotel's perspective, I'd love to tell the story of this one hotel owner, really nice older hotel, 200 rooms, and him and his staff were a little bit weary of bringing all homeless people from the streets into this very nice hotel. But they became so engaged with they called them guests because they were their guests. There was one of the housekeepers who would give candy if they kept their room clean. And so their ability to understand and empathize with those experiencing homelessness was the biggest change. And we did a big celebratory thank you luncheon, and that was the takeaway. We had private businesses who did catering, security, different things at the hotels, and it really engaged them in understanding the homeless problem and also feeling like they were part of the solution. And finally, around residents and solutions, the City of Tucson for many years has had a homeless protocol program, which is a way for residents to call in concerns of where people living on public property, whether it's the frontage roads along the freeway, the riverbeds, underpasses, those type of things. And as they call or email, they're very frustrated. So we utilize that time with our staff to help educate and really let them know that we understand what they're dealing with. And it really helps build relationships with our community.
Great, thank you so much. I know through the work with Maricopa Association of Governments and partnership with all of the local and tribal governments, as well as other very good partners throughout the entire region, we've engaged more than 1,500 people through a series of outreach forums. And each outreach forum focused on a particular sector, such as the faith community or the business community or the nonprofit community. But then we had a large event where we brought everyone all together, and it was really inspiring because of the connections that were being formed. And so you had some groups, for example, like the faith community, very well-intentioned, wanting to do some really, really good things. Their work wasn't always aligning with the needs of the local government, for example, or the nonprofit community. So just being able to have people talk with each other across those sectors and to identify their common goals and then to align their actions in respect to those common goals was particularly helpful. So thank you for your responses on that. Our second question then builds on something that's already been touched on, and that is the diversity of our state. We are a very large state. We have geographically diverse areas ranging from very, very cold to right here, very, very hot. We're also racially and ethnically diverse, culturally diverse. Our weather, our climate is diverse. And so with all of this diversity, if we're not addressing homelessness through a very inclusive lens, then we're helping some, but maybe inadvertently harming others. So the next question then for the panelists is, how are you using this inclusive lens, keeping in mind that that's that reflects diversity on a whole number of different indicators. Who would like to begin?
We'll just go in order again. Okay. Thanks. One of the things that we are finding is that effective supportive housing and transitional housing includes engaging persons with lived experience, both for advice on how to set up the services, how to design the housing and community space, and as well as including persons with lived experience in your navigation and case management. So, for example, we have Tucson, actually, I'm going to steal some of your thunder. Tucson's youth demonstration project, homeless youth demonstration project, has a whole youth council that advises all of the service providers on how to form the services. They have peer counselors for the homeless youth that are youth, and they have experienced homelessness. And what we're finding is folks in these folks that we're trying to serve have a very particular experience based on their demographic, right? The seniors, the youth, even the survivors of sex trafficking, LGBTQ+, and they all have their own trauma that they have experienced. And it effectively serves, the better way to serve them effectively is to have someone that understands what they've been through, that has lived that same experience, and that's who they'll talk to. That's how they heal. So that is one thing that we are focusing on. I know a lot of agencies that we've worked with both in Phoenix and statewide, Community Bridges, is very good at finding navigators with that lived experience for the particular population that they're serving. So I'll stop there.
And I'll build on that a little bit. We provide the homeless outreach team across northern Arizona. It's our PATH program. Probably familiar with that. And 3 of our 7 team members have experienced homelessness. And so they're very critical. They know how to engage folks in a way that some of the rest of us might not. And it's evident when they're working out there under bridges and in the middle of a snowstorm in Flagstaff or in the middle of a heat wave in Mojave County. And I think that is a critical piece. And to remember that it's not one size fits all. We are so diverse. I mean, in rural Arizona, Coconino County is the 2nd largest county in the United States, not the state of Arizona, the United States. Mojave County is 5th, and Yavapai is 21st. So those are really large counties, and what happens on one side of the county may not be the same. We recently did a lot of work and engaged with the city of Page, and Greg, I know you're out there. And what we discovered was not necessarily a homelessness situation, but a displaced situation. It's very, very different. It has to be approached differently. It involves a lot of cultural, expectations from the reservation that neighbors that community. So I think really being aware of what those diversity challenges are and addressing them and making sure that you are addressing the individuality of those as well as that lived experience is critical.
I want to speak from the perspective of the Continuum of Care. For Southern Arizona, Pima County, the city of Tucson, about 2 years ago, we became what's called the collaborative applicant for the planning body around homelessness. And that has really provided us some unique opportunities, staffing the Continuum of Care. In the past year and a half, we have brought in significant training, hosted trainings on race equity, around the homeless response system. We just think as homeless providers, having done this for many years, that we are serving everyone. But the truth is there is still a segment of our society, people that we're not really able to reach or understand how to best tailor our services based on their race or background and culture. We've also did a very intense, for 3 of our agencies, a multi-month learning collaborative focused on identifying and improving equity approaches within the homeless response workforce. We created a committee within the Continuum of Care around diversity, equity, inclusivity, and we have adopted some key principles and strategies around race and equity within our own city planning documents and the COC's strategic plan. Talking about geographic diversity, because it's Tucson and Pima County, we have some rural areas in Pima County, we realized our coordinated entry system was really inadequate to serve those rural areas. So we were able to apply for a grant to really expand and improve that coordinated efforts into our rural areas. And then when we're talking about the different weathers and climates, I mean, I think this summer we've seen some incredible, much better rain, but it's also created a lot of problems for those who are in encampments or on the streets. And so we've done some improvements around coordination, really utilizing our shelter beds more, and also holding beds as police are finding people that are flooded out. We've done that. We also had a kind of a loose heat relief system in the past, but the last 2 summers we actually funded the Salvation Army. They had 3 different sites, and not only was it a place for people to get in out of the sun, but they also provided snacks and water, and then we could engage on services. So we've done a lot to really understand how to better serve them through a lot of these challenges.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. And in terms of the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care that's based here in Phoenix, we've conducted a fair amount of research around racial equity. And our local research tells us that African Americans are 4 times overrepresented in the homeless population than their share in the general population. Native Americans are overrepresented by twice their numbers in the general population. So that's revealing some significant concerns, particularly because there are inequities within the system itself. And so if we're not fixing those inequities that are built into the system, we're really not able to have an inclusive system where everyone can share equally of the benefits and no one is overburdened at all. And so we're very focused through our racial equity plan on addressing 4 main areas, including data. So being able to track the progress that we're making, looking to that data to ascertain if we've actually made progress or not, if what we're doing is having an impact or not. Also, as well with forming a Persons with Lived Experience Council. That's critically important because people with lived expertise have exactly that. They have expertise that for those of us who have not experienced homelessness, we just don't necessarily have it. That's not meant to devalue one person over another. Instead, it lifts everyone up and it's honoring their particular the value that they add to this, whether that's educational, through lived expertise, or through their own perspectives. And so with our Persons with Lived Experience Council, we're working with them to identify ways that they can meaningfully contribute to how we're shaping this system, how they can meaningfully contribute to how we are redesigning the way that we work together in a much more inclusive way. So we're very excited about that. In terms of heat as well, we do have a regional heat relief network with a number of different partners involved, and we're ramping that up to go beyond and to still offer information about where people can access assistance, but then also use that as a foundation to be able to build those collaborations that are needed to make more assistance available. And so, for example, this year, we're very thankful to receive a $50,000 sponsorship from Arizona Lottery through their Gives Back program that enabled our partners to be able to purchase more than 300,000 bottles of water that then we're able to put right into the field to assist people who are experiencing homelessness right away. So our next question then is, of course, a very timely one. It's regarding changes since the pandemic. And so all of our lives have changed, some for the better, some tragically for the worse, as a result of the pandemic. Our culture has changed as well. As was mentioned earlier, we have a sense of urgency around homelessness that maybe we didn't have before, in part because of the pandemic, but also because of the housing crisis that we're facing in so many of our communities, where it's not just people who are experiencing homelessness who are without homes, it's our teachers, our nurses, and people who are working in our communities who can't afford to live in our community. How do we address that? And so as our culture changes, that impacts the way that we view our work. It also impacts the way that we work with one another. And so another question for our panel today then is, how do you see this culture shifting? What has contributed to that culture change? And how are you adapting as a result? Cindy?
Thanks. So one of the things that we all saw during the pandemic is everyone moving quickly to quickly adapt and innovate and provide services for folks who were experiencing, homeless due to COVID, who had to separate, who were at risk, who were COVID positive. And a lot of innovations came out of that, and a lot of new uses for existing resources came out of that. We had the homeless heat relief programs in Tucson that Liz talked about. The Phoenix Convention Center was opened for the homeless. The Phoenix buses were used to house homeless this summer. We're looking at buying sprung shelters, which are more of those big tents that you see for events and things like that can be air conditioned to use for homeless services. So a lot of innovation there, as well as cooperation, and the hotels also that Liz was talking about. We're seeing that statewide, where for the pandemic specifically, we set up hotels in all jurisdictions across the state. And that was to house COVID positive patients and also to separate a lot of special populations that were high risk, like seniors. And what we found doing that, real experience, was that folks in a hotel settle down quicker, they become stabilized quicker, they have their own space, they're more comfortable, they have their stuff with them, they have their pet with them, and they're turning towards permanent housing very, very quickly out of those types of shelters. And that is so different from the congregate shelters that we've run for so many years, that we want to take advantage of that. As the state housing department, we are looking at putting our funding together to help jurisdictions across the state purchase hotels to continue that successful transitional housing and meet people where they are, as we talked about before. Folks in the rural areas, the small towns and communities, they want to stay there when they become homeless. They're comfortable there, they're familiar with the surroundings, they may have family and friends there, so they should have a shelter at that area, right there where they are, not having to come into the big metro areas and experience the congregate shelter environment. So we're just trying to latch on to and leverage some of that great innovation that happened during the pandemic and continue that, especially with all of the about $2.6 billion in American Rescue Plan funding is coming into the statewide. Every jurisdiction's getting it, state's getting it. We want to make sure we're all communicating and leveraging that funding to really move forward with some of the things that we found are successful.
Thank you.
So I think for the rural areas, we also reacted very quickly. It became very apparent very quickly that with the pandemic that we needed to address the homelessness situation. Not that we didn't need to address it before, but it was very critical. And I think that we've said for a while that housing is healthcare, but it became even more critical during the pandemic. And some of the things that we did in retrospect may have not been the best solution, but we reacted quickly and we did save lives. But in hindsight, realizing that, gosh, if we had been better prepared, if we had been talking sooner, if we had been looking at this problem a little bit differently, we might have been able to do a little better. And I think that we have a very unique opportunity right now, as you mentioned, Cindy, that we have funding coming down. There's more funding now than I've ever seen since beginning this work. But it's important that we work together, we collaborate, we talk about what our needs are, realize that we all have maybe a slightly different agenda, but together we can utilize those funds in the best manner for our community. Not for our agenda or your agenda, but for what our community needs, and remembering that all those communities are unique. So housing is healthcare.
So you asked how much change. We're pretty, as public servants, pretty adaptable to change, but I think what we've learned is that this change was unlike any other change. And so trying to stay ahead of things, I think about how I went in early 2020 to say, I don't really want to wear a mask. Okay, now we're wearing masks, but not only are we wearing masks, now we're doing this. And so having to be able to keep changing my mindset around the problem was really challenging. But fortunately, it wasn't just I had to figure it out. We figured it out very collaboratively. I totally agree about the housing is healthcare. The one thing I saw that was very different and new was the increased involvement with our healthcare providers. So with the efforts that we've done with the shelters, the hotels, El Rio is our healthcare for homeless provider. We have we contracted with them, and again, that's part of their job on the state level as far as their funding, but we did a lot more involvement with them, and so I saw that as a real major change for the positive. Where it was not so positive, where we assumed business as usual with around homeless providers, we saw a very big shift with our shelter providers. So decreasing beds, so now we have a whole lot less beds. We saw shelters just closing down if they had a positive case, because now they have to quarantine the people that were there. So we could literally go for weeks without one of our large shelters at any point in time. So those changes and reactions really forced us to do some things that we'd never done before. And so the funding, of course, has been super helpful. What we found was our nonprofit partners really hard to staff up. So what we ended up doing is taking some of those services and service provisions that we didn't do as a city and started hiring more navigators, more outreach teams, doing some of those services ourselves to help complement and add to what our community providers could do. And our partnership with the county, I'm really proud of how our department works with the department with Pima County around the entitlement funds. And what we've learned to do is what are we good at, and what are you good at? And so where they don't want to own housing, we're buying the housing, they're providing funding for services. And so those are some of the things we're coordinating. We meet weekly and just trying to maximize those resources that we get into our community, and just also encouraging our nonprofit partners. One of the things around the eviction, talking about homelessness, if we don't have a good system to address the evictions, we're going to see that impacted. And so one of the things we've done is partner with a nonprofit that is very high on technology. That effort has allowed us to be super successful in getting our ERAP funds out, and we're about 73% of our first round. So, making sure we're going to the people who do it better than we do, and being able to acknowledge that. So those are some of the things. The other last item, I think we have a real opportunity to look at different housing options. A lot of us talk about tiny homes. It's a little bit of a heartburn, but also just looking at what other options. One of the things we funded in our funding process this past year is a matching service for seniors to do roommate options. So someone who owns a home but doesn't want to live alone, and then we have seniors who can't afford to go find a unit on their own. We have an agency that's going to be matching those. So looking at other options, again, SROs are the thing of the past, bringing those back, single room occupancy buildings. So trying to find ways to increase our housing options, because our housing costs have increased so much, and I don't see wages keeping up with that, or even the limited incomes, Social Security not keeping up with that. So we have to find other options to help really fill in the gaps.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. Yeah, and at least two things really draw out from those responses. One is the level of communication is higher now than it has been probably ever. And we figured out that business as usual is no longer an option. And because we've all been under the same constraints or very similar constraints, that's forced us to reach out. And then throughout the pandemic, we've realized, well, if we can do that during the pandemic, maybe we can continue working together and communicating better even after the pandemic. And those lines of communication are critically important. So for example, with the shelter roundtable that Cindy was talking about, it was important to hear from the providers that they're facing two different competing constraints right now. On one hand, it's still very hot, and so they're wanting to bring in as many people off the streets as possible because of the danger of the heat. But then on the other hand, we're still facing the danger of COVID, and we're seeing increasing rates of COVID among people experiencing homelessness. So at the same time that they're trying to bring in more people, they're realizing that they can't bring in even the number of people that they were before. And so it's forcing or begging the development of new options, such as being able to use hotels and being able to establish those ties, those connections with the private sector, with businesses. We're seeing 80% positive housing placement rates for clients coming out of hotels. That's far higher than what we see from traditional shelters. And there's a number of reasons that contribute to that, but that's an important piece of information to have on hand, particularly if you're considering what additionally can we do in our communities. Do we want to convert more hotel rooms into temporary housing for folks and be able to report an 80% positive rate of people entering housing, permanent housing, as they leave that hotel? So those lines of communication are really critically important, because as we begin to understand each other's crises and problems, we can become part of those solutions. Through the Maricopa Association of Governments and the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care, we've been driving towards those multi-sector solutions. So for example, back in May, we just had adopted 14 strategies that are rallying the region for how we're going to address homelessness together. And then right now, we're in the process of developing an action plan that will help us to identify particularly the role of local and tribal governments in addressing homelessness, strengthening that infrastructure throughout the region in close partnership with the nonprofit community, with people with lived experience, with the faith community, with the business community. So being able to address this better together because we have the communication, and as a result of that communication, then we just have better coordination moving forward. And so that is not always an easy conversation, but it's absolutely a worthwhile one, and we're finding that more and more people are willing to have that conversation because of this culture shift caused by a variety of different crises like the pandemic and like the affordable housing crisis that we're facing right now. Now, we do have some additional questions, but I'd love to pause, though, and see if you have questions or things that you'd like to add. I see a number of people in the audience who are doing fantastic work in your own communities, and particularly reaching across different sectors. So the microphone is in the middle. We'll pause here for a moment and see if you'd like to contribute, either with a question or with a comment.
Good morning. I really appreciate the panel this morning. My name is Christine Ellis, and I'm a council member in the city of Chandler. At this time, I have been dealing with this for the last 20 years, not only at the level of the government, but also on the ground, having been working here in the region, basically with the homeless. What I would like to ask is, why is it at this time we are not including the mental health issues that we are seeing? That's number one. That is 85% of those who are homeless are being reported having some type of mental health issues. Why is that not part of the wraparound services? The second question is that this homeless issue, to me personally, is being viewed truly as a third world country issues here in this country, and specifically in the state of Arizona, right down the street. It used to really put me in a position of questioning myself. I'm sure you could hear an accent. I'm originally from Haiti. And so to see this happening at the shadow of the Capitol was always something that woke me up to a whole different level of looking at someone. The wraparound services that we are asking of, it's not rhetoric, it's not just keep talking, because we keep doing the same thing and except we expecting a different result. And to me, that's insanity. Yeah. At this point, now that we have had this amount of money that we have never had before, I want to hear a statistic. Every single one of you, you talk about what you've been doing, but how many people have you taken out of homelessness? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Councilmember Ellis, for your passion and for your question. So really focus on at least two areas. One, around mental health. Absolutely agree that is an absolutely critical component of this, and it has to be a part of any solution because of the mental health needs among people experiencing homelessness. And then the other is really a call to action in terms of how can we allow homelessness to manifest like a third world country in the midst of so much prosperity here in this country. So thank you very much for those questions. I'd love to offer it to our panelists if you have thoughts around mental health and how do we raise up this issue.
I haven't used this. Okay, good, it works. I wasn't sure if it worked. So thank you so much, Council Member, for your question. I do remiss that we didn't include the topic of mental health. I think it's because it's so embedded in the work that we do, both on the continuum of care level and within this, our programs. Many of our homeless providers have also contracts with the state to provide behavioral health services. That's one of those pieces that I think has evolved. It continues to change, with Access taking over the state behavioral health system, has had a lot of improvements, but there's still a ton of challenges around that. So at the table, at every meeting is Arizona Complete Care for Us, which is our behavioral health providers. So they are a critical component of that, and making sure that we're connecting people to those services, because that's what provides the stability once we get them into housing. The one thing I also failed to mention was around housing first, in that I truly believe, and it has been shown, that getting people into housing and wrapping them around services, including behavioral health and other healthcare services, really ensures that stability. As far as numbers, I can tell you for my outreach team that we have in the city, and we're only one piece of many services and connecting to housing, they doubled the amount of people that they housed last year. So out of our hotel program, we housed nearly 400 people, and then our outreach team also housed around 300. Again, this is with very limited resources. We used our public housing units for a considerable amount and housing choice vouchers, but then we need landlords. And that's one of the things we haven't mentioned, is that we have, I know statewide, a lot of investors buying up multifamily units, so we're getting less and less landlords working with some of our programs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Liz. Sandy?
Yeah, I would advocate for additional dollars for wraparound services. I'm always going to, from the nonprofit side, advocate for that. I think historically a lot of dollars have come down federally that allow for leasing and utilities and sticks and bricks and those kinds of things. What we've lacked in the past has been supportive service dollars. I would say that has been on the increase, but it really needs to increase a lot more. And I do agree that we are engaging with our behavioral health folks daily. They are the critical component of anything that we do, and they are always at our table. They have some housing themselves, but they are a critical piece for those wraparound services. But it's over and above that. They are also have high caseloads and are strapped, and there are services that could be provided or that are necessary beyond just the clinical piece that I think are critical. So if, as elected officials, I would love to see you advocate for additional dollars for supportive services.
Thank you. And from the state housing perspective, I mentioned that Director Simplot and I just started this summer, but one of our first actions was to start some roundtables with our managed care plans in the state with Access at the table at these roundtables, and they're very active right now. They have created a fund that's helping with supportive housing, because housing is healthcare, things like that. But they've also done a good job of listening to providers of supportive housing and the issues that they have around supportive housing for persons experiencing mental health issues. And we are working on solutions with all of them at the table and talking through all those problems, because we recognize that the service isn't where we all want it to be. And a lot of it's staffing and ability, but just bringing it to the table and talking about it in detail. And then the other thing is we are working with Access and providing access funding to create a housing property on state land for 24/7 care for seriously mentally ill. So people can go there and get stabilized with 24/7 care specifically for them, because I think a lot of that's missing right now. It's in group homes, and some of it's the law where you can't have facilities that are larger than so many beds. But this is a start to create some more of those facilities to help people that really need to be, isolated for a while and get that intensive care to get better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And through the Maricopa Association of Governments and the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care, we are working very closely with our behavioral health partners, such as Community Bridges, Teros, working very closely with Access as well. And they've been at the table in addressing homelessness in such a substantial way. And many of people experiencing homelessness are Access eligible, and that's really the doorway that opens them up to be able to receive a broad variety of services. And so we're very focused on strengthening those connections and making sure that people are able to access those services and benefits as a result, particularly around mental health, because that is such a critical component. In terms of the comments about how can we basically allow homelessness to exist amidst so much prosperity, we've been seeing so many leaders coming to the table around this. And communities that maybe have not been involved in addressing homelessness before saying, yes, we have a role in this as well. And so while the problem certainly persists, the problem is increasing, we're also seeing tremendous levels of support and people recognizing that we can address homelessness together better. And we are seeing some very good outcomes in terms of progress and more people being housed than ever. There is a lot more work to do, though, absolutely. Yes, ma'am, your question.
I'm Joanne Shapley, a council member from Colorado City, and my question is in regard to the president's lift on the Mexican border. I'm just wondering how that has affected homelessness, particularly in the southern end of the state. That's my question.
Thank you very much. Liz, it sounds like that one's for you.
Yes. I keep saying so, I'm sorry. So we have definitely had an influx. We've done a lot of coordination with Pima County, and the city has taken on the role of providing the hotel rooms, so that and their stay is very short, 1 to 3 days until they find where they're going to be stabilized and move to another community. So that work, it hasn't affected our homeless problem. They're not necessarily, we're not seeing them mixed in, is the best way I can say it. What I think that there's a lot of coordinated effort to not allow that to kind of have that spill over into the homeless issue. And so there's a lot of coordination at the county, the city, and the state level. And from my perspective, I'm not as involved in that, but I have been included around the hotel piece. And so it's been a challenge, but I think we've met the challenge the best that we can, and again, coordinating with the federal government and some of those pieces. So again, it's a lot of communication, a lot of coordination.
Thank you very much, Liz. Hello, your question.
Hi, Liz Recchia, Government Affairs Director for the We Serve Association of Realtors. Thank you very much for this. We have, as an association a few years ago, we tried to reach out and work with some entities for the pieces that we can help with. We have identified some big problems with people who are either coming out of homelessness or are in danger of going into homelessness in various populations. And a lot of that has to do with just not knowing the practical everyday tools that you need in order to manage your flow of income so you can make that rent payment, or even be in a position where you even know you should be doing that, or what the responsibilities are as a tenant, as a landlord, the Landlord-Tenant Act, those types of things, understanding the contract you're signing and what that is. So we have but we have never had anyone take us up on those offers. So our members, as you can imagine, are very involved in their communities. We have brokerages that basically have set up their own little programs. We've had individuals who, through their churches or other community organizations, they are providing those services. And we have gone to smaller entities to help provide some of those services. Some of the groups that we have identified most in need and that our members are most concerned about, and we do have a homeless task force at our association. People who have identifiable needs that and a lot of times they're physical, they could be emotional, they could be mental, they could be financial. Something unfortunate has happened, and for whatever reason, it caused them to spiral and just lose control. But coming in and sitting down with them and then just standing next to them when they make the phone call and saying, okay, we found out about this, now what's the next step? Walking them through that brings them back to a place where they can start helping themselves and access the services. One of the things we really are appreciative is the City of Surprise has done an excellent job. I get an email almost every week with an update of what is going on and what the services are. I push that out to my members, and now my members can actively help other people in that community access those resources. So I would encourage any entity to sort of look at what City of Surprise has done. We interact with them all the time. We love it. It's very helpful to us. So I encourage that type of thing. The other group that we've identified are people with substance or mental health problems. We can help them with the physical part, how to rent, how to manage your money, but we can't help them with the mental health and the substance. So I would really appreciate, and it's been hard for us to connect our people to those type of really intense services. So having a directory of some sort, I know there's 211, and we have certainly accessed that, but it's very deep and sometimes difficult to navigate even for us to help try and connect people. So something that is more pointed for us, particularly as we go into our rural communities, because we cover West Maricopa, Southeast Valley, Pinal, Cochise, and Santa Cruz counties. So our rural communities in particular, we have problems connecting with services. When it comes to what government can do, as you're talking about renting rooms, sometimes we end up with these short-term rental ordinances that prevent that very action. And you got to remember that, depending on whose numbers you look at, between 75 and 80% of all our rentals are privately owned by an individual, small person, right? They have one, they have three, they have five. And preventing them from doing that is encumbering what your solution is, and it's encumbering them as well. And I'll give you one example of what our members have for investors. We have investors who have invested in a 3-bedroom house near a VA or other hospital facility, a cancer facility, a VA hospital, so that either members of that family can be brought in short-term to be with that person if they're in hospital, or alternatively, if people who are in the hospital, they don't need to be there anymore, but they still have to be there every single day for rehab purposes, they can rent in that house a room for whatever it is, 30 days, 60 days, 2 weeks, whatever they need in order to access those services. But when we get into short-term rental situations, that goes out the door. And that population is never, ever talked about. So keep that in mind as a city, when you're looking at those. Who are all the populations? It's not all party houses. We know that. The stats show that. There are huge populations of people that will become a problem in the homeless community if we cannot keep serving them. And then when it comes to ADUs, accessory dwelling units, similar type of situation. We have cities and counties now, and I don't know what happened, but something all of a sudden 500 square feet, doesn't matter if you have 35 acres or you have 6,000 square foot lot. 500 square feet for an ADU is about the max. But that's not really something that someone can live in, or if they need medical help, let's say that they have equipment, medical equipment they need. That's not large enough for them to actually be serviced. So somehow having that conversation about what's appropriate for that population or the general population. In our rural areas, we have people with 1 acre or more who would gladly build 2 or 3 ADUs to rent out, and they are forbidden to do that. So you haven't helped yourself when it comes to that. That needs to be looked at. When it comes to the COVID restrictions and the potential evictions, I will tell you this is something we have been upset about since day one. And part of that is only 10% of that federal money has been distributed. And we are actively at the national level and have been the whole time lobbying. I encourage cities and towns, lobby your federal officials. That money must be released. It's sitting there. And then the other thing that Treasury did that no one talks about for the property owners who want to access it, first out, they propagated rules that said the landlord cannot apply for those funds, only the tenant. And when the tenant does decide they wish to apply for funds, the landlord has to provide them with their tax identification number, which for a lot of them is their SSI number, and all of their financials. So everybody think about if that's something you would want to do if you owned that property. Now, these are people who are small, and they haven't been paid in over a year and a half. They need the money. The tenants need to be able to pay that rent. The tenants were never forgiven rent. So they're looking at a big, huge chunk of change they're going to owe. It's terrible for everybody. So those are two really big issues with that. The property owners would gladly, and we already had it in the day after they announced that this economy was going to shut down for the 2 weeks. We had landlords and tenants renegotiating those contracts on their own because it's a private contract. And when the federal legislation came in 2 weeks later, it took a sledgehammer to all that. So that's how we ended up here. So think about how you as a city or town can help the federal government understand they need to get out of this business, and we can take care of it at the local level and through private contract. That will happen. It was happening. So in response to your evictions concern, I really strongly suggest that everybody help make it so that federal money gets released and we get off the back of the people who can lease it. Because I'll tell you what's happening right now. You're losing more and more of that rental because if I'm small, I'm putting it on the market, and that's what we're seeing. Rental product is being put on the market by the small investor, and in this market, they can get more money. In a lot of other markets, we're seeing them just go BK.
Right.
So that's
Liz, thank you. Thank you, Liz. Liz, thank you very much for that. One of the many roles that government can play sometimes is to remove those barriers. And so it's to check their processes to make sure that they're supporting stakeholders in this. I know that as we've been speaking with the justice courts, they're reinforcing all the time how the impact of the moratorium being lifted on the evictions, a lot of that really is on the landlord. It's on the landlord to choose whether they're evicting the person or not. And you're right, in this market, they can evict and they can get someone paying a much higher rent as well if they're not putting it on the market. So there's roles for everyone in this work, and it's important to look at what those roles can each be. Councilmember, how are you?
I am well. I'm Councilwoman Laura Pastor. I represent Phoenix. Before COVID, we have invested $20 million in this space.
Yes.
When COVID hit, we put another $30 million. So we're at right now $50 million. And for me, if we need the money, yes, let's do it. But for really in this whole process, as our systems are broken. And what I mean by broken, because they're siloed. The blessing of the pandemic is that we were able to recognize that fast and furious. And we were able to say, we need to shift and open up our restrictions or open up whatever guidelines we have. Why do we have them? Let's update, let's move. I think the conversation also has to be, there's a difference between being homeless and being a transient population. Being homeless is really about, at that moment, I've lost my job, I lost my house, I lost all my income. I'm now on the streets with the family, and where do I go, and how do I move? We have a transient population. The reason I know this is because I have a large population in my district. A transient population that no matter what we do, providing services, it takes 7 times for somebody to trust us, it takes 7 times for, I know the story. That transient population is not going to enter. And that's really where I find in that population, we need to figure out how do we engage them in a way that they will come in and take their meds. A lot of it is behavioral and mental health. And so when we talk about this, I feel like we need to have 2 separate strands of truly being homeless and then our transient behavioral, mental, emotional piece. Because that's where the challenge is and where I think a lot of money should lie. The other piece is that we don't have, at this moment, enough nonprofits to provide quality work and also modernize in the sense of modernizing equipment, data to move people through, or a database where then people can get on it and see as they're being case managed. This summer, I had interns spend 4 weeks in the field to find out why they were not taking services. A lot, 200 and some people we spoke with, day and night, said, we will not take services because we don't trust the system. What happens is I enter, I'm working with one person, they hand me off to someone else. I'm not sure where I'm at, who I'm dealing with, that person's gone, and you know what, I'm done. As a woman that finds challenges in every system, my brain would not put up with that. So if we're asking people that have some issues then to go into a system that then they don't understand and they lose a case manager. So those are some of the things like, yes, we can build the plan, we can build it. It's about executing and having what is there and what we need in order to do it, be successful. And I think that's where we, as a collective, have to go and say, okay, here's the barrier within our own system. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult because cities, we all have barriers. But I think that's also part of our conversation. I do want to thank you guys for doing this. This has been years and years. I think Phoenix finally said, enough is enough. We need a regional plan, and we're not going to play anymore if we don't get a regional plan. So I really appreciate the work. And Cindy was part of the city of Phoenix. She retired and then went on to the state. But she knows this work, so we're in good hands.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Member. Yeah, and just the importance of person-centered care is critical. It shouldn't be about the person trying to fit themselves into a fragmented system. It should be about the system seamlessly serving that person. So we agree and absolutely are committed to that regional approach as well. This will be our last question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Yes, sir.
Well, so far I've been the only lone representative for the guys in the room. So I'm Prescott City Councilman, and excuse me, we don't have empty hotels. We don't have the money that you have in Tucson. We don't have a housing authority. We do have people who say, I just don't want to look at them. Get them, move them somewhere. Not here. What I haven't heard, I heard just a little bit from the Catholic Charities representative. I haven't heard, what do you want us to do as a small community to help with this situation? What can we do? I've heard, help us get grants. Is that all we need to do?
Thank you very much for that. Why don't we have each of our panelists respond, if that's all right? And these will also be your closing thoughts for the session.
Okay. I missed what community you said you're from. I'm sorry.
Prescott.
Prescott. I worked in Prescott for a while with the Salvation Army, so great community. I love Prescott. It is challenging when you don't have, I think you mentioned, Amy, the infrastructure. What can be done, I think, is really more about the grassroots of bringing in together we talked about the faith community, the business community, and the local elected officials to say, since we don't have some of the resources, what resources do we have and what's the capacity? And I agree with you. A lot of times it is about just not seeing the problem. But unfortunately, it's getting harder and harder to not see the problem because it's growing. So, the best I can offer at this point, and I think, again, whether you have a ton of resources and whether you're from a small community, what we all share in common is a desire to not see people living on the streets. And how can we get there? And utilizing what resources we do have. Because I will say the faith community really has a great opportunity to step up too. So.
And I'll just put in from the Arizona Department of Housing, we are going to have some notices of funding availability on the street soon for transitional shelters and new shelters and supportive housing. So should folks in your community and your city leaders, identify a building, a plot of land, or something that is conducive to the creation of a shelter or a transitional facility, that's where we can help you with funding. So it kind of needs to be a partnership, though. You need to come in with a plan, and as Liz said, maybe the faith-based community or some nonprofit organizations, anybody that has ideas in Prescott, including the city of Prescott, coming in and together, I think we can probably make something happen.
Thank you so much. Sandy?
And I think for me, from the rural perspective, it's advocacy and it's education. You mentioned those folks that just want them out of here. We need to educate those folks. These folks that are experiencing homelessness have some sort of trauma. We can't just address the problem, we have to address the root cause. And it starts with destigmatizing that and not criminalizing that and understanding what we need to do to get to the heart of that. But it starts with education of folks who need to understand why folks might be experiencing homelessness. It goes back to what Liz said, and Liz, please, I'd like to get your contact information. Finding folks like that have a tool in the toolbox, a realtor or a group of realtors who says, we understand this piece of it, we can bring this. That's traditional business community that a lot of folks haven't engaged before. It's not a nonprofit problem to solve, and it's not just about funding. It's about rallying your entire community around a situation, educating, advocating wherever you can at the state level, at the federal level, to address that, for more resources. But really it's about educating your own community on what they can do collectively.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank
and
you.
3 quick thoughts. One is to remove whatever barriers there could be in terms of zoning or construction, the requirements around that. Convening partners. I think local and tribal governments have a unique role to be able to be that trusted messenger, and then to build support for this work in the neighborhoods. Because we can have the best ideas and programs, but if we can't cite them, we can't do them. So thank you so much to all of you. Thanks to our panel. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.